The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face as I began my online lesson. I was a high school teacher, dedicated to my students, even from the confines of my home. But domestic tranquility was a concept utterly foreign to me. My husband, Leo, was home as well, his presence a disruptive storm cloud in the otherwise quiet apartment. The clatter of his video game, a cacophony of digital gunfire and explosions, bled into my virtual classroom. "Honey," I began, my voice strained, trying to maintain composure for my students, "could you please keep it down a bit? It's hard for me to teach with all the noise." He swiveled in his gaming chair, his eyes, dark and brooding, fixing on me with a chilling intensity. "This little bit of noise bothers you? You looking down on me, is that it?" His words were laced with a venomous resentment that always seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. Before I could even formulate a response, his hand lashed out. 2 sharp slaps landed across my face, the force of them sending a ringing shockwave through my skull. I recoiled, stunned, but he was already upon me, his fingers clamping around my throat, cutting off my air supply. I was yanked from my chair, crashing to the floor with a sickening thud. From the digital void of my laptop, a chorus of horrified screams erupted, my students, witnessing this brutal invasion of our classroom. But their cries seemed only to fuel Leo's rage. He seized a fistful of my hair, dragging me across the floor like a rag doll, slamming my head repeatedly against the wall. Each impact resonated through my body, punctuated by my own desperate screams, echoing into the ears of every student connected to the online lesson. 2 hours later, the fragmented video clip, titled "Teacher Assaulted During Online Class," had become a viral wildfire. Millions across the internet were privy to the shocking spectacle of my husband's violence. My quick-thinking students, bless their hearts, had already contacted the police. By the time the officers arrived, the alcohol-fueled haze that had gripped Leo had begun to dissipate. He was almost sickeningly contrite. In front of the uniformed officers, Leo dropped to his knees with theatrical despair. "It's all my fault. I drank too much, lost control. Sarah, my love, let me see where you're hurt. Are you in pain?" He reached out, feigning concern, attempting to pull me into a forced embrace. I recoiled instinctively, stepping back from his touch as if burned. This was a well-rehearsed performance. I knew the script by heart. Without missing a beat, he launched into his usual self-serving justification. "Sarah, it's only because I love you so much. I'm terrified of you looking down on me, that's why I acted so impulsively. It's all because of you, because I care too much." As he spoke, he began to slap himself with exaggerated force, a grotesque display of performative remorse. Just then, my in-laws, alerted by some unseen alarm bell that always seemed to ring when Leo was in trouble, arrived on the scene. My mother-in-law, a woman whose heartstrings were exclusively tied to her son, descended upon me like a harpy. "Serafina! Look what you've driven Leo to," she shrieked, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You knew you were teaching online. Why didn't you just turn off the camera? Broadcasting our family business for the whole world to see. Don't you know this will ruin his reputation? He just has a bit of a temper, honestly, couldn't you have just talked to him calmly?" My father-in-law grunted in agreement, his nostrils flaring with indignation. "I told Leo from the start, I didn't approve of this marriage. Woman from a common family, no match for ours. But Leo insisted on marrying you, and look how you repay him, constantly provoking our Leo. Why else would he hit you if you weren't constantly pushing him?" Their synchronized blame-shifting was a practiced, nauseating routine. The police officers, clearly uncomfortable with this family drama unfolding before them, exchanged weary glances. One of them, a young officer with a patient demeanor, finally intervened. "Sir, madam, please, let's not jump to conclusions. Family matters are best resolved through calm discussion. We're here to help mediate." He gently tried to lift Leo from his kneeling position. "Mr. Leo, please, stand up so we can talk properly." But Leo remained stubbornly on the floor, clinging to his melodramatic posture. "No. Not until Sarah forgives me. I won't get up until she does." My mother-in-law, her face a mask of forced distress, grasped the officer's arm, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Officer, my daughter-in-law is just being difficult, causing you all this trouble. Look, my son has been kneeling for so long, he's clearly repented sincerely. Can't you just forgive him on her behalf? The officer politely but firmly disengaged his arm. Madam, forgiveness is not up to us. It's up to your daughter-in-law. She is the one who was hurt. My mother-in-law's gaze snapped towards me, sharp and accusatory, like a physical blow. I kept my head down, silently applying antiseptic cream to the lacerations on my arms, refusing to engage. Perhaps it was the sight of my bloodied state that finally registered with her. Realizing that this situation was spiraling beyond their control, her tone abruptly shifted, softening into a sickeningly saccharine plea. Serafina, dear. Of course, Leo was wrong to hit you. But if you don't speak up and clarify things, letting those internet people slander him, that's not right either. Every couple has disagreements. Is it really necessary to blow this out of proportion? Listen to your mother-in-law, Sarah, my father-in-law chimed in, his voice now a paternal veneer. Just tell the police and your students it was a misunderstanding. Family harmony is paramount. Don't hold on to Leo's little mistake, all right? I finally lifted my head, my expression devoid of emotion, meeting their expectant gazes. You think this is a little mistake? My voice was quiet, but steady. The police officer, sensing the escalating tension, interjected again, his tone conciliatory. Look, disagreements between couples are normal. When things happen, you need to talk it out, not resort to violence. Leo, still kneeling, eagerly echoed the officer's words. Exactly, Sarah. I promise, I'll never hit you again. Just don't let me drink so much, and I swear, I won't lose control. The officer nodded, turning back to me with an encouraging smile. Your husband understands his mistake. Marriage is about compromise and understanding. We've given him a stern warning. We hope you can forgive him and give him another chance to make things right. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, a sound that was half cry, half mockery. The pain from my injuries flared with the movement. Before today, I had tried not forgiving. Countless times. I had told the police, pleaded with them, that Leo's remorse was a charade, a well-worn tactic. I explained that he would escalate, that the violence would become more frequent, more brutal. I even recounted the time he had beaten me so badly I miscarried, and how even that hadn't stopped him from raising his fists again. But the police, constrained by legal definitions and bureaucratic limitations, had always given me the same disheartening response. The harm I'd suffered wasn't severe enough to warrant serious charges. Their hands were tied. All they could do was advise, communication, and understanding. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that once the police left, the communication would resume in the form of Leo's fists, the understanding would be etched into my bruised flesh. So, I smiled, a hollow, forced smile that stretched my aching face. I would play their game. You're right, I conceded, my voice carefully modulated to sound placating. My husband just cares too deeply, he got a little carried away. It's just a small disagreement, really. Nothing serious. I turned to Leo, my eyes locking with his. We've talked it through, haven't we? We'll be fine now, right? Leo blinked, momentarily taken aback by my sudden capitulation. Then, a slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. He nodded vigorously. Right. That's right. I knew you were the most understanding wife in the world, Sarah. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. That's the spirit. Family harmony is everything, the officer said, making a final note in his pad. Now, he continued, turning to me, the video clip of your online class has generated significant public discussion. People are concerned. Ms. Shen, would you be willing to cooperate with us and issue a public statement to address the situation? Of course, I replied instantly, my voice bright and agreeable. Leo shot me a surprised glance, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, quickly replaced by smug satisfaction. The defiant, tearful woman who had threatened divorce just hours ago was now docile, compliant. He believed he had finally broken me, that I had succumbed to his control. He had no idea that this was just the meticulously crafted opening act of my own carefully designed drama. Before the wedding, my in-laws had actually been pleasant. Looking back, I realized they weren't being kind, they were simply eager to offload their volatile son. They knew they were pushing me into a viper pit, desperate to secure a victim before I could escape. On our wedding day, we posed for countless photos. Leo's eyes, I now recalled with a chilling clarity, were always on me, following my every move. At the time, I had naively interpreted that look as adoration. Now, I recognized it for what it truly was, the predatory gaze of a hunter marking his prey. The first crack in the facade appeared on our wedding night itself. Leo insisted on placing a white shirt on the bedsheets before we consummated our marriage. A wave of nausea washed over me. I, in my innocence, confessed that he was my first love, that this act felt like a profound betrayal of trust. His response was chillingly pragmatic. Evidence? How else will I know if it's genuine? Gotta verify the goods, right? My face paled. He, of course, excused his crude demand with the same tired refrain, he was just too invested, too passionate. And, blinded by a foolish desire to make the marriage work, I had yielded. The next 3 months passed with an unsettling, fragile peace. Until the day Leo came home brandishing a recently obtained medical report. I picked it up absent-mindedly, glancing over the results. My eyes snagged on the height measurement, 177 centimeters. Hey, I teased gently, I thought you said you were 6 feet tall. Looks like you exaggerated a bit. Leo was in the kitchen, peeling fruit with a paring knife. He froze, his head snapping up. His eyes, devoid of warmth, locked onto mine. In that single, terrifying second of eye contact, something inside him snapped. He exploded. He lunged at me, the fruit knife now brandished, the sharp tip pressed against my throat. Just 3 centimeters. Just 3 centimeters, and you look down on me? His voice was a guttural snarl. Terror seized me, paralyzing me for a heartbeat. Then, primal instinct kicked in. I forced myself to remain calm, knowing any flicker of fear, any hint of defiance could be fatal. With trembling hands, I soothed him, whispered reassurances, even dared to embrace him. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he lowered the knife. But in the aftermath, the chilling realization solidified, in that moment, he had been genuinely capable of killing me. I filed for divorce. But Leo refused. He became a relentless stalker, haunting my parents' home, my workplace, bombarding me with promises, tearful pleas, and desperate vows. Even my father, weary of the escalating drama, urged me to relent. Serafina, he hasn't actually hurt you, has he? Just assert yourself a bit, but don't push it too far. My mother echoed his sentiments. Men are sensitive about their pride. You made fun of his height, of course, he was upset. It's understandable. A sickening sense of unreality washed over me. Was I the one being unreasonable? Was I overreacting? Had I somehow twisted a minor incident into a monstrous confrontation? Weakened by doubt and familial pressure, I capitulated. I moved back in. That compromise became my descent into hell. I was trapped in a gilded cage, suffocating under layers of pain and denial, while those around me insisted, Leo is a good man, deep down, you need to be more understanding, you're not perfect either, all couples fight. With each concession, I chipped away at my own boundaries, eroded my own sense of self-worth. Then, I became pregnant. And Leo, drunk and enraged by some imagined slight, beat me again. Predictably, I miscarried. This time, I called the police. My mother-in-law, ever the master of manipulation, hinted to the officers, there's always 2 sides to every story. Who knows if the child was even his? My father-in-law piled on the insinuations. A healthy pregnancy wouldn't just spontaneously miscarry. She probably didn't want the baby, afraid of something being exposed. The police officers, while sympathetic, were bound by protocol. Again, the injuries weren't severe enough for criminal charges. They could only offer mediation, a band-aid on a gaping wound. One kind female officer, her eyes filled with genuine concern, quietly suggested I pursue a legal divorce, or even consider relocating to another city, starting anew. I managed a bitter smile. Hadn't I considered all of that? Divorce? Leo had threatened to murder my entire family if I even mentioned the word again. Escape? He had hidden all my identification documents, vowing to hunt me down to the ends of the earth if I dared to leave him, promising a mutual suicide pact. In that abyss of despair, I desperately longed for someone, anyone, to offer a solution, a lifeline. I called my parents, sobbing, telling them about the miscarriage, about Leo's brutality. My father's response was a crushing blow. Did you do something to provoke him? Did you give him a reason to be angry? That question extinguished the last flickering ember of hope within me. In that moment of desolate clarity, I understood the stark, brutal truth: this will only end one way. Either Leo dies, or he will torture me to death, piece by piece. And I was not ready to die. Not yet. Which left only one path. A dangerous, desperate, and meticulously planned path. Using the online class incident to expose Leo's violence was merely the opening gambit, the first carefully calculated move in my plan. It served four critical purposes. First, it was a test, to gauge whether he would dare to assault me in such a public, recorded setting. Second, it established me as a victim in the eyes of the world, fostering sympathy and laying the groundwork for alliances. Third, it seized the moral high ground, drawing public attention to the insidious reality of domestic violence. Fourth, and perhaps most crucially, my feigned defense of Leo, my public forgiveness, was designed to inflate his ego, to embolden his arrogance, to lure him into a false sense of security. It was bait, carefully laid to ensure he walked directly into my trap. Years of enduring Leo's volatile moods had made me an expert in his psychological landscape. I knew precisely which words would trigger his explosive rage. He was a man consumed by fragile ego, an insatiable need for control, and a bottomless well of insecurity masked by bravado. Any perceived slight, any hint of disrespect, would send him spiraling into a violent frenzy. "Honey, could you please keep it down a bit? It's hard for me to teach with all the noise." I had uttered those seemingly innocuous words, laced with just the right amount of weary impatience. And as predicted, Leo, oblivious to the ever-present camera lens, had erupted, unleashing his fury upon me. As if only through brute force could he silence the nagging voice of his own inadequacy. From the very beginning of the online class, I had instructed my students, "Today's lesson is quite complex. I highly recommend you all record the session for later review." A seemingly routine pedagogical suggestion. In reality, it was a deliberate maneuver. I knew they would record it. And they did. Every single student captured the horrifying tableau of my assault. The evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. I was a dedicated teacher, genuinely invested in my students' well-being. They, in turn, were fiercely loyal to me. Their immediate action: calling the police, uploading the video, becoming my online advocates, was entirely predictable, part of the calculated equation. Everything was proceeding according to plan. And now, the next, even more elaborate act of my carefully constructed drama was about to commence. 3 days after the online class incident, the lockdown lifted. Returning to school felt surreal. The hallways buzzed with a hushed sympathy. My colleagues, my students, all regarded me with a mixture of concern and pity. But I consciously adopted a demeanor of cheerful resilience, the same approachable, gentle teacher they had always known. In the face of shared tragedy, self-pity only deepened the sorrow. Optimistic strength, I reasoned, would evoke a deeper, more potent form of empathy. "Ms. Shen, are you all right?" During class, while reaching up to write on the blackboard, I inadvertently stretched my arm, pulling at a still tender wound. A sharp intake of breath, barely audible, betrayed my pain. My students, ever perceptive, noticed instantly. "Ms. Shen, are you hurting? Please, sit down, you must be exhausted." Even the most disruptive students in the class rushed to bring me a chair. A lump formed in my throat, tears pricking at my eyes. Seeing my sudden emotional vulnerability, their concern intensified. They grew bolder, peppering me with questions, their voices earnest and unfiltered. "Ms. Shen, we saw the police report. After he hurt you like that, you really reconciled with him?" "Yeah, Ms. Shen, why don't you just divorce him? Divorce him while you still can, before you have kids. My parents always say they stay together for my sake, but honestly, I wish they would just separate." Looking at their bright, earnest faces, my heart ached. "Teachers have their own complications," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "But I promise you, I will resolve this situation. It won't affect your studies, I promise." "Ms. Shen, we're not worried about our studies. We're worried about you." The class clown, the one who always tested boundaries, shouted the words that echoed in everyone's hearts, triggering a chorus of agreement. Their pure, unadulterated concern, like shards of ice shattering against glass, resonated deep within me. The teachers in the faculty lounge had offered similar words of support. "Serafina, if you need anything at all, just ask. We are all behind you." Ethan, the burly, outspoken physical education teacher, a former professional boxer, had been particularly vehement after seeing the video. "If that bastard ever lays a finger on you again, you tell me. I'll teach him a lesson he won't forget." I managed a watery smile, my eyes stinging with unshed tears, and nodded gratefully. I was, in many ways, profoundly unlucky. Unloved by my in-laws, unsupported by my own family. But I was also, in a strange twist of fate, incredibly fortunate. I had secured a stable teaching position, and found myself surrounded by these extraordinary, compassionate students and colleagues. It was because of them, because of their unwavering support, that I found the courage, the resolve, to fight back, to gamble everything against fate itself. As the evening self-study session neared its end, a message flashed on my phone screen. From Leo. "Redstone Bar. Come pick me up." The message was curt, demanding, devoid of any politeness. An order, not a request. I knew what it meant. He was drinking again. Which meant I had to tread carefully, navigate his unpredictable moods with extreme caution, lest I trigger another violent outburst. I drove to the Redstone Bar, parked, and went inside to find him. The music paused momentarily between songs, and his booming voice cut through the ambient noise. "You gotta understand women, right? They only listen to one thing, force. My old lady, she was all mouth, threatening divorce, the whole 9 yards. But one good beating, and now she's quiet as a mouse. Even when the cops showed up, she didn't dare say a word. That's how you get results." His cronies erupted in raucous laughter, showering him with praise and backslapping encouragement. "That's the old wisdom, right there. Spare the rod, spoil the wife. You're a master of domestic management, Leo." Leo puffed out his chest, basking in the adoration. "Damn right. She's trained now, completely obedient. Tell her to go east, she wouldn't dare even glance west. And you know what? I might have to beat her again soon, especially in public. Gotta remind her, and everyone around her, who wears the pants in this family." More boisterous cheers and backslaps. Leo was practically levitating on a cloud of self-congratulatory delusion. And I, standing unnoticed at the edge of the bar, felt a surge of icy calm wash over me. "Excellent, Leo. Keep thinking like that. Keep fueling your arrogance. You're about to reap the bitter harvest of your own monstrous ego." "Oh, look who it is. Wife's arrived," Leo announced, spotting me across the room, raising his glass in a mocking toast. His eyes, glazed with alcohol and self-importance, held a cruel, taunting amusement. He was still lost in his delusional fantasy of dominance. And I would play along, for now. "Honey, take your time, enjoy your drinks," I said, lowering my gaze, my voice deliberately meek. "I'll just wait here for you. Or, if I'm in the way, I can wait outside." I deliberately played the role of the subservient, intimidated wife, feeding his insatiable need for control. A chorus of wolf whistles and jeers erupted from his companions. One of them slapped Leo on the back. "Damn, Leo, you've really broken her. Trained her to heel like a puppy." Leo's chest swelled with pride, his grin widening. He waved a dismissive hand in my direction. "Wait outside then." I retreated obediently, waiting in the car for over an hour as Leo continued his drunken revelry. Perhaps my performance of subservience had pleased him. Or maybe the alcohol had simply mellowed his aggression. Whatever the reason, he was in a strangely jovial mood when he finally emerged from the bar. He hummed tunelessly to himself as we drove home, leaning against the car window, a rare moment of something resembling contentment. As I parked the car in our assigned spot in the apartment complex's parking lot, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a colleague from school, about the upcoming New Year's Eve gala, specifically about the teacher's performance. Before I could even decipher the message, Leo snatched the phone from my hand. "Who are you texting at this hour?" "Another one of your guy friends?" His voice was suddenly sharp, his eyes narrowing, the jovial mood vanishing in an instant, replaced by a familiar predatory suspicion. The shift in his demeanor was so sudden, so volatile, it sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I knew his triggers, knew how to defuse his simmering rage, for now. I adopted a playful, almost childish tone, batting my eyelashes at him. "Honey, look closely. It's a woman. My colleague." Leo hesitated, scrutinizing the sender's profile picture, scrolling through her contact information, poring over her social media profile. Finally, grudgingly, his expression softened slightly. But he still didn't relinquish the phone. He read the message from my colleague with meticulous suspicion. "You're rehearsing for a show? What kind of show?" I took the phone back, showing him the message, explaining calmly. "The school's having a New Year's Eve gala, all teachers are required to participate. Rehearsals were paused due to the lockdown, but she's letting me know they're starting up again tomorrow. I need to be there." Leo's eyes, still laced with suspicion, bored into me. "Is it dancing? One of those shows where men and women are all tangled up together?" The question was laced with a veiled threat. Any misstep, any hint of perceived deception, could unleash his fury. I forced a light, unconcerned laugh. "Of course not. It's a skit. And it's all female teachers." A carefully constructed half-truth. Leo's gaze lingered on my face, searching, probing. After a long, tense moment, seemingly unable to find any inconsistency in my story, his body relaxed, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. "Sarah," he sighed, his voice softening, almost apologetic. "Don't be mad at me for being suspicious. It's just, I care about you too much." "I know, honey," I murmured, nodding meekly, playing the role of the understanding, forgiving wife. Because I did know his nature. And because I knew his nature, I had lied. The New Year's Eve gala wasn't just a skit. It was also a dance performance. And not just any dance. It was ballroom dancing. The kind of dance Leo loathed with a visceral, irrational intensity. My ballroom dance partner was Ethan, the PE teacher, the retired boxer. Given my height, and his, we were the most naturally compatible pair amongst the faculty. Our ballroom routine, designed for a high school audience, was deliberately chaste, almost comical. No overtly romantic or intimate movements, more emphasis on light-hearted steps and humorous interactions. But it was enough. More than enough, to ignite Leo's volatile jealousy, to detonate his fragile ego. Initially, rehearsals were uneventful. A quiet, almost serene period of false calm before the storm. Until the day of the full dress rehearsal. Backstage, in the chaotic flurry of costume changes and last-minute adjustments, I asked Ethan to resend the rehearsal videos and photos he had taken earlier. "Didn't I already send them to you last time?" Ethan asked, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I gave a sheepish smile. "Yeah, but I forgot to save them properly. Just checked, and the files have expired." A plausible, innocuous explanation. "No problem, sending them now." Ethan pulled out his phone, tapping away. I knew, with chilling certainty, that at this very moment, Leo, still recovering from his drunken stupor from the previous night, would be stirring in bed. Our home computer, left perpetually on, would be logged into my WeChat account. As Ethan started sending the large batch of photos and videos, the insistent notification chime of WeChat would begin to blare from the computer speakers, a relentless, piercing sound. That morning, I had deliberately maximized the computer volume, a seemingly insignificant detail, a subtle manipulation of the stage. To prevent any accidental early awakening of Leo, I had even muted notifications for all frequently contacted individuals. Then, just 1 minute before Ethan began sending the incriminating files, I had silently, stealthily, unmuted all notifications. The barrage of notification sounds, sharp and insistent, was designed to penetrate even Leo's alcohol-induced slumber, to pique his ever-present paranoia. Wasn't he always snooping through my WeChat messages? Desperately searching for any imagined transgression, any justification for his violence? Go ahead, Leo. Look. Examine every photo, every frame of video, with your jealous, possessive eyes. And as a final, deliberate provocation, I snapped a photo of the rehearsal stage, focusing on the potted floral arrangement placed center stage. I sent it to Ethan, adding a seemingly casual note. Let's use the flower pot in the middle of the stage as our landmark during the rehearsal, to get our positioning right. The message, ostensibly directed to Ethan, was in reality a breadcrumb trail, a neon sign flashing directly to Leo. A blatant declaration: I am at the auditorium stage, in close proximity to another man. Are you feeling insecure, Leo? Are you consumed by jealousy? Is your need to control me reaching a boiling point? Then come, Leo. Come and claim your prize. Just, please don't disappoint me. And now, please welcome the senior faculty of the Year 3 department, with a captivating ballroom dance performance. The music swelled, a lilting waltz, and pairs of teachers gracefully glided onto the stage. Hand in hand, side steps, back steps, skirt flicks. My muscles moved on autopilot, years of dance training taking over. My eyes, however, remained fixed, almost imperceptibly, on the auditorium entrance. The tempo of the music quickened, the drums began to beat faster, like frantic heartbeats, like the relentless pounding of rain on a tin roof, like the crashing of waves against the shore. The music reached its crescendo. Ethan led me into a dramatic, high-velocity spin. I heard the delighted cheers of the student audience. I heard the swirling melody of the music, reaching its peak. And then, finally, I heard it. The raw, primal roar that ripped through the auditorium, a sound that chilled me to the bone, a sound I had been both dreading and anticipating. Leo's voice, distorted by rage and alcohol, shattering the festive atmosphere. Serafina Shen. You dared to deceive me. You dared to cuckold me. I'll kill you, you whore. Leo, brandishing a glinting blade, charged towards the stage, a deranged figure of pure, unadulterated fury. The sudden eruption of violence was too swift, too shocking. For a split second, everyone froze, paralyzed by disbelief. He was upon us, a whirlwind of rage, before anyone could react. But I had been waiting, watching, anticipating. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times. The first frenzied swipe of his blade, I dodged it, my dancer's reflexes kicking in, years of forced agility finally serving a purpose other than mere performance. My evasion only fueled his rage. You bitch. If I can't have you, no one will. We'll die together. His words were a torrent of obscenities, his face contorted with hate, as he lunged again, the knife arcing towards me, a sliver of deadly steel in the spotlight. But this time Ethan was there. Ethan, the retired boxer, the protector. He moved with lightning speed, intercepting Leo's attack. One hand clamped down on Leo's wrist, a vice-like grip, the other disarmed him, wrenching the knife away and flinging it off stage, into the orchestra pit with a metallic clang. Disarmed, Leo's violence didn't abate. He turned his fury on Ethan, jabbing a finger in his face, screaming accusations. You're helping her. I knew it. You two are having an affair. Ethan's fists clenched. Ms. Shen and I are colleagues, nothing more. You. Before Ethan could finish, Leo lunged again, a rabid animal. He sank his teeth into Ethan's face, sinking them deep, like a cornered dog, tearing at his flesh. Ethan, clearly unprepared for such barbaric savagery, recoiled instinctively, shoving Leo away with considerable force. The force of the push sent Leo staggering backward, but he didn't release his bite, his teeth still clamped down, tearing deeper, drawing blood. Now, a cold, detached voice echoed in my mind, clear and resolute amidst the chaos. Now, it's my turn. My gaze locked onto the ceramic flower pot positioned stageside, a prop, an ornament, now a weapon. I grabbed it, hefted its weight, raised it high above my head. And brought it crashing down on Leo's skull. Crack! The ceramic shattered, the sound echoing through the stunned silence. Leo's teeth finally released their gruesome hold. His eyes widened, registering a flicker of shock, then glazed over. He teetered, swaying on his feet, and then, with a slow, agonizing slump, he pitched backward. His trajectory was clear. He was falling towards the edge of the stage. At that moment, I could have reached out. Could have grabbed his arm, pulled him back from the precipice. But I didn't. I merely stood there, frozen, feigning shock, my eyes wide, my body trembling, watching with a chilling detachment as Leo plummeted from the stage. Thud. Leo landed headfirst on the hard floor below. Blood bloomed, a dark crimson stain spreading rapidly from the base of his skull. The music had stopped. The cheers had died. The auditorium was silent. Leo lay motionless, a broken doll at the foot of the stage. And I, Serafina Shen, the battered wife, the forgiving victim, the pawn in everyone else's narrative, finally, irrevocably, became the author of my own story. The ceramic flower pot by the stage, I had placed it there deliberately, days in advance. And it wasn't the only strategically positioned prop. Hidden just behind the stage curtains, I had also stashed a heavy metal kettle, a sturdy cloth tie used for bundling stage drapes, a small arsenal of seemingly innocuous items, carefully selected. None of these were traditionally classified as lethal weapons. They were ordinary objects, unlikely to be flagged as premeditated instruments of violence, making a self-defense argument far more plausible. As for the knife Leo had brandished, a dull, butter knife, nothing more. The night before, while Leo was lost in his drunken stupor, I had meticulously cleared the kitchen of every sharp blade, every potentially dangerous implement. Only this blunt knife remained, placed conspicuously in plain sight, in the most accessible kitchen drawer. It could inflict harm, yes, but its thick, rounded edge was hardly capable of delivering a fatal blow. And Leo, blinded by his incandescent rage, wouldn't notice such trivial details. He was a paradox, profoundly insecure, yet consumed by arrogant self-belief. Fists of fury, but an utter void where a brain should be. Of course, mere props were insufficient. Physical preparations were only one facet of a far more intricate plan. I had immersed myself in countless domestic violence defense cases, poring over legal precedents, searching for loopholes, desperate for a path to escape. And I had uncovered a bleak, disheartening reality. Establishing self-defense in domestic violence situations was an uphill battle, a legal tightrope walk. The principle of self-defense demanded that the force of retaliation must be proportionate to the immediate threat. And because the context was a marital relationship, the legal system, with its inherent biases, would never assume that a husband's intent was to actually kill his wife. In countless cases of excessive defense, a chilling phrase recurred with disturbing frequency: domestic violence delusion syndrome. The legal argument went something like this: the wife, subjected to abuse, often deludes herself into believing her husband intends to inflict further harm, even death. However, the fact that she is still alive, despite the abuse, proves the husband's lack of homicidal intent. Therefore, if the wife preemptively kills her husband, fueled by this delusion, it cannot be considered self-defense. The sheer absurdity of it was breathtaking. Years of real, tangible pain, etched into flesh and bone, dismissed as mere delusion. But without irrefutable evidence to unequivocally demonstrate self-defense, what recourse did I have? I resolved then and there, I would become the perfect victim. I would fight back, yes, but I would also ensure my own complete and unblemished escape. To achieve this, several conditions had to be met. First, the Self-Defense Act had to be witnessed, undeniably documented. Ideally, video evidence was crucial, a shield against the domestic violence delusion syndrome accusation. However, the audience couldn't be too large, lest Leo be apprehended by security before he even reached the stage, disrupting my carefully orchestrated scene. The gala rehearsal was the perfect setting, ostensibly. To assess the performance's visual impact, students could be tasked with recording, and security was minimal, almost non-existent. Second, my actions had to be perceived as unavoidably forced, a desperate measure of last resort. Either I had to kill him in a life-or-death struggle, or I had to intervene to prevent him from harming someone else. The latter scenario, acting in defense of another, aiding a victim, was far more palatable, far more readily forgiven than killing one's own husband. Third, I needed to cultivate significant public sympathy, to sway public opinion in my favor. Women who dared to defend themselves against abuse often faced the insidious victim-blaming narrative. Just like my mother-in-law's insinuations after my miscarriage, she was probably asking for it. And my father's accusatory question, "Did you provoke him?" as if proving I wasn't a perfect victim, somehow justified the brutality inflicted upon me. Even in anti-domestic violence legal rulings, women were often disadvantaged, viewed with inherent suspicion. Therefore, a groundswell of public support, voices speaking out on my behalf, on behalf of all women trapped in abusive situations, was essential. Only then could the legal system, while upholding the letter of the law, also consider the spirit of justice, the human element of the tragedy. Fourth, ideally, my retaliation should not be the direct cause of his death. This was not strictly controllable, a matter of chance, but I had taken steps to subtly influence the odds. Leo suffered from severe hypertension-related heart disease and coronary artery disease. A pre-existing vulnerability. He was forbidden from consuming excessive salt or alcohol. Yet, paradoxically, he craved intensely flavored, heavily seasoned food and was a borderline alcoholic. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I had deliberately prepared spicy Sichuan cuisine daily, knowing his weakness for it. And the night before the rehearsal, I had brought home 2 bottles of premium baijiu, potent Chinese white liquor, a treat I'd purred, knowing he wouldn't resist. He hadn't. He had indulged, willingly, recklessly. My blow with the flower pot, in itself, might not be fatal. But a heart already weakened, strained by disease and alcohol, pushed to its breaking point by rage and physical exertion? That was a different story. That was a gamble worth taking. To escape the living hell of my marriage, I had meticulously planned every detail, every nuance. And as I had hoped, the blow from the flower pot wasn't immediately lethal. Acute cardiac arrest, however, was. But fate, in its cruel irony, wasn't quite finished with Leo. Against all odds, against medical probability, he hadn't died on the operating table. He had been resuscitated, pulled back from the brink, only to be plunged into a deep, irreversible coma. The doctors offered a grim prognosis. Even if he were to regain consciousness, his life would be irrevocably altered, a shadow of his former self, permanently incapacitated. Gazing down at Leo's still, pale form in the sterile hospital room, a slow, almost involuntary smile spread across my face. It seemed even fate itself deemed a swift, merciful death too lenient for him. Now, the true torment could begin. Now, it was my turn to inflict suffering. After careful review and legal deliberation, this court has determined that Serafina Shen's actions in preventing her husband from inflicting grievous harm upon her colleague do not constitute a criminal offense. Her actions are deemed justifiable self-defense, and therefore, we have decided to dismiss all charges and issue a no prosecution ruling. The prosecutor's pronouncement, delivered in the sterile confines of the courthouse that morning, ignited a volcanic eruption from my in-laws. Serafina Shen ruined my son's life. How can this not be a crime? Why isn't she being prosecuted? Did she bribe you all? How much did she pay you? We'll double it. Outside the courthouse, my in-laws descended into a public spectacle of outrage, accosting the bewildered prosecutor, demanding an explanation, screaming accusations. The prosecutor, displaying remarkable patience, reiterated the court's findings. Ms. Shen's actions are not the direct cause of Mr. Leo's critical condition. Mr. Leo's severe state is primarily attributable to his pre-existing conditions, severe hypertension-related heart disease and coronary artery disease, exacerbated by his intoxicated state at the time of the incident. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, his voice gaining firmness, the video evidence is conclusive. Your son initiated the violence, brandishing a weapon, and engaging in unprovoked assault on stage. The entire nation has witnessed the footage of his domestic abuse. From every conceivable angle, Ms. Shen's actions unequivocally meet the criteria for self-defense. My mother-in-law, deaf to reason, impervious to facts, simply escalated her performance of grief. Seeing her demands ignored, her theatrics failing to elicit the desired reaction, she collapsed onto the ground in a dramatic heap, wailing, "The prosecutor's been bribed. They murdered my son." The small crowd of onlookers, many of whom had followed the case and seen the viral video of Leo's assault, exchanged skeptical glances, offering not a shred of sympathy for the self-proclaimed victim. My mother-in-law's performance, devoid of an audience, began to falter, her wails losing their initial fervor, morphing into whimpers. Seeing her theatrical display losing steam, I decided to offer a bit of encouragement. Stepping forward, I addressed her with a saccharine sweetness that dripped with irony. "Just a minor correction, madam. Your son isn't dead yet. He's merely comatose. Lying in a hospital bed. I'd advise you to get up now. The ground is cold and damp. If you catch a chill and fall ill, who will take care of Leo then? He'll be left too. Well, you know. You venomous viper. How dare you curse your own husband to die?" My mother-in-law sprang to her feet, her grief instantly transmuted into incandescent rage, lunging at me, claws extended. The prosecutor, anticipating her predictable outburst, swiftly intervened, placing himself firmly between us. He fixed my in-laws with a steely gaze. "If you continue to cause a disturbance at the courthouse, you will be arrested for disorderly conduct. Is that clear?" My in-laws, finally recognizing the futility of their performance, retreated, their fury contained, for the moment, to venomous glares directed at me. As they stormed off, they hurled one last, impotent threat. "Leo is still your husband. We give you 3 days to pay for his surgery and medical expenses. And don't even think about touching his insurance payout. That money is ours." I simply smiled, a slow, knowing smile, offering no verbal response. When it came to demanding money, Leo was my husband. But when it came to acknowledging his abuse, suddenly, he wasn't. If they were going to play dirty, so could I. Because, as it happened, I had a rather substantial gift prepared, just for them. Before marrying Leo, I knew his parents were in business, vaguely described as entertainment and leisure. Beyond that, details were scarce. Any deeper probing was met with evasive silence. My father-in-law often reminded me, with thinly veiled disdain, that our families were unequally matched, hinting at their superior social and financial standing. Indeed, the Fong family was wealthy, but the source of that wealth remained shrouded in ambiguity. It wasn't until after the wedding, when they felt I was securely captured, that they casually revealed the true nature of their business: online gambling. Sophisticated, large-scale internet gambling operations, manipulating back-end data, systematically defrauding countless individuals, driving them to financial ruin. My in-laws, pioneers in the field, high-ranking players in this digital underworld, had amassed a considerable fortune through these fraudulent schemes. Their activities, I soon realized, constituted large-scale, organized fraud. This revelation finally illuminated a long-standing puzzle. Individuals who thrived in legitimate business, I reasoned, were typically shrewd, socially adept, masters of networking and public relations. Why then were Leo's parents, despite their wealth, so crass, so openly contemptuous, so lacking in basic social graces? The answer was chillingly simple. Their wealth was built on a foundation of illegality, secrecy, and exploitation. Their true nature, their true business, could not withstand the scrutiny of daylight. From that moment on, I began to meticulously gather evidence. But they had, or so it seemed, retired from active operations, leaving no readily accessible trail of incriminating data. Then Leo slipped into his coma. In the aftermath of the attack, consumed by a desperate need for answers, I forced open the lockbox in their storage room, the one they believed was securely hidden, and discovered a trove of documents, meticulously kept records, and damning financial ledgers. A painstaking process of piecing together fragments of information, cross-referencing dates, transactions, and names, finally yielded a complete, irrefutable chain of evidence. That afternoon, fresh from the courthouse victory, I walked into the police station and filed a formal report. When my in-laws were escorted into the interrogation room, they were still sputtering with indignant denial. "Do you even have any proof? Our bank accounts are clean. No anomalies. If you're talking about fraud, where's the money? You can't arrest people without evidence." Then, they saw me. Their bravado evaporated, their protests dying in their throats. You reported us?" My father-in-law's eye twitched uncontrollably, his gaze radiating pure venom. I smiled, a wide, genuine smile, devoid of any pretense. "Yes, I did. I know your money is meticulously laundered, practically untraceable to the average investigator. But don't worry. Motivated by civic duty and filial piety, I provided the police with comprehensive evidence. You can relax now, and prepare for a long, comfortable stay in prison." "What do you gain from destroying us?" my mother-in-law hissed, her voice laced with venomous disbelief. "We took you in, fed you, clothed you, gave you red envelopes every holiday. How can you repay Leo, repay us, with such treachery?" Her words almost made me laugh. "Forgive me, but I have a job, a salary, I can support myself quite comfortably. Frankly, the paltry sums in those red envelopes wouldn't even cover half of my medical bills after each of Leo's episodes." The pretense of politeness, the charade of deference, was over. The masks were off. Why did I do this? Are you truly that clueless? Watching Leo beat me, Did it give you some perverse pleasure? Did it make you feel like your son was some kind of alpha male? I took a step closer, lowering my voice, my words now sharp and precise, like shards of glass. But you know how I found the evidence that will send you to prison? You thought you had hidden that lockbox so cleverly, concealed within the wall. But when Leo beat me, he smashed my head against that very wall, again and again, so violently he cracked the drywall, revealing the hidden compartment. So, if you're looking for someone to blame, blame yourselves. If you hadn't encouraged Leo's violence, if you hadn't condoned his abuse, the evidence would have remained hidden. You have only yourselves to blame for your downfall. My mother-in-law's face contorted, turning a mottled shade of purple, her lips trembling with impotent rage. You ungrateful, viper snake. My son slept with you for years. Don't you even know who you belong to? Who I belong to? I raised an eyebrow, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. I shook my head slowly, deliberately. I don't belong to anyone. I belong only to myself. With the weight of irrefutable evidence stacked against them, my in-laws were swiftly convicted of large-scale fraud and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Before sentencing, my mother-in-law, in a desperate attempt to mitigate their fate, pleaded for leniency, for suspended sentences, for house arrest. Her rationale: their only son lay comatose in a hospital bed, requiring constant care. From a humanitarian perspective, the court could have considered mitigating circumstances. But only if there were absolutely no other family members capable of providing care. That viperous wife of his is useless. My son is in this state because of her. I wouldn't trust her to care for a goldfish, let alone my son. My mother-in-law's voice, laced with pure bile, dripped with contempt whenever she spoke of me. Her vehement pronouncements against my fitness to care for Leo were repeated ad nauseum, echoing through the courtroom, inadvertently undermining her own plea for leniency. The judge, his brow furrowed, finally interjected. Madam, your unsubstantiated pronouncements of distrust are hardly grounds for judicial leniency. Do you take this court for a fool? My mother-in-law sputtered, momentarily silenced. The judge continued, his voice now firm, authoritative. We have thoroughly investigated the circumstances surrounding Mr. Leo's injuries. His wife acted in justifiable self-defense. Her character, as attested to by her colleagues, her students, and her neighbors, is exemplary. She is a responsible, trustworthy individual. Had your son not initiated violence, brandishing a weapon and assaulting an innocent person, none of this would have occurred. The judge's words hung in the air, a damning indictment of their culpability. It was my cue. I stood, addressing the court, my voice clear and resonant. Your Honor, I respectfully request the court to disregard the defendant's plea. While they are incarcerated, I will ensure Mr. Leo receives the best possible care. I will personally oversee his medical needs and ensure his well-being. A carefully crafted performance of magnanimity. Concluding my statement, I turned to my in-laws, offering a saccharine, almost theatrical smile. Mother, father, please, rest assured. Focus on your rehabilitation within the correctional system. Leave Leo's care to me. I promise to take excellent care of him and ensure his speedy recovery. At the final words, I even dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, a perfectly timed, perfectly insincere gesture of emotion. As long as it ensured their imprisonment, a few well-chosen, insincere words were a small price to pay. My mother-in-law's face contorted, her carefully constructed facade of victimhood crumbling. Her claw-like fingers pointed at me, trembling with rage. You venomous, poisonous woman. If you dare to mistreat my son, I swear, I will make you pay. Even now, facing imprisonment, she still resorted to threats, still clung to the delusion of control. But this time, her threats were hollow, meaningless. A flicker of genuine amusement touched my lips. I adopted a tone of mock-innocent indignation, a parody of their own self-righteousness. If I were to mistreat Leo, how would I be any different from him? I refused to sink to his level. I am not a monster. Leaving the courtroom, the oppressive cloud of fear that had hung over me for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a lightness, a profound sense of liberation. The overcast sky parted, and sunlight, long absent, streamed through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm, golden glow. I stretched, inhaling deeply. How long had it been since I had dared to look up at the sky? Married to Leo, I had become accustomed to walking with my head bowed, a subconscious habit, because he believed my upright posture made him appear shorter, less manly. I had learned to avoid eye contact, to avert my gaze, because direct eye contact often preceded a sudden, brutal slap across the face. I had desperately tried to cling to my sense of self, to salvage some semblance of dignity amidst the daily onslaught of abuse, but inevitably, a part of me had withered, had shrunk, had become afraid to simply be myself. I took another deep breath, filling my lungs with fresh, clean air, straightened my spine, and lifted my chin. Only then, bathed in sunlight, breathing freely, did the full weight of my victory truly sink in. I had won. I had won back myself. My phone buzzed. The insurance company. Leo's life insurance payout had been processed, the funds deposited into my account. My in-laws had vowed I wouldn't see a single penny. Yet, the entire sum, by legal right, was now mine. From the payout, I earmarked a substantial portion, prepaying Leo's hospital bills, his ongoing medical expenses. I hired a private nurse, a woman named Xiaojia, to provide round-the-clock care. Xiaojia, perceptive and sharp-witted, recognized Leo instantly, recalling his face from the viral video, the notorious domestic abuser. "Ms. Shen," she declared, her voice firm, "please find another nurse. I am a domestic violence survivor myself. I have nothing but contempt for abusers. I cannot, in good conscience, provide dedicated care for him." Her words, surprisingly, resonated with me. "Dedicated care isn't necessary," I replied, a hint of irony in my voice. "Adequate care will suffice." Xiaojia paused, her gaze shifting from my face to my neck, lingering on the faint, fading bruises still visible beneath my collar. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Ms. Shen," she said, her voice softening, a hint of complicity in her tone, "I understand perfectly. You can leave him in my care with complete peace of mind." Peace of mind, indeed. Having entrusted Leo to Xiaojia's adequate care, I never visited him again. Until, a month later, Xiaojia called. "Ms. Shen," she said, her voice neutral, almost detached, "Leo has regained consciousness. Would you be willing to visit him?" Revisiting Leo in the hospital room felt like stepping into a macabre wax museum, a grotesque parody of his former self. He had withered, drastically diminished, almost unrecognizable. Prolonged immobility had bleached his skin to a sickly pallor. His eyes, once burning with rage, now held a vacant, unfocused stare. The swagger, the arrogance, the terrifying vitality that had defined him, all extinguished, leaving behind only a hollow shell. Sensing my presence, his gaunt face slowly turned, his listless gaze drifting from the sterile white ceiling, finally, haltingly, focusing on me. A flicker of recognition, a faint spark of awareness, ignited in his deadened eyes. "B.A. Leo struggled to speak, his voice a garbled rasp, words forming clumsily in his atrophied throat. Xiaojia, standing discreetly by the door, offered a clinical explanation. "He only recently regained consciousness. His speech is still impaired." "Has a doctor examined him?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes. His prolonged coma caused significant oxygen deprivation to the brain, resulting in irreversible neurological damage. While he has regained consciousness, his motor functions are severely compromised. He will likely remain bedridden for the rest of his life." I nodded, a curt, emotionless acknowledgement. Leo's gaze remained fixed on me, his eyes now pleading, desperate. "B.A. Ma." I pulled a chair to the bedside, seating myself with deliberate slowness. "Are you trying to ask about your parents?" Leo's lips twitched, a barely perceptible tremor. A thin, whitish film coated his mouth, cracking and reforming with each labored breath. "Rest assured," I continued, my voice devoid of warmth, "they are well taken care of. They have food, shelter, gainful employment. At this very moment, they are likely hard at work, operating sewing machines in the prison workshop." Leo stared at me, his eyes wide, struggling to process the information. A long, agonizing pause stretched between us. Then, comprehension dawned, a horrifying realization spreading across his face, his pupils dilating in shock. J.E. Bitch. The word, mangled, guttural, barely audible, escaped his lips. I waited, patiently, for him to complete the sentence, but no further words came. Instead, I saw a thin trickle of saliva escape the corner of his mouth, dribbling down his chin, unchecked, uncontrolled. Still resorting to insults, even in this state? I remarked, my voice clinically detached. Let me offer you some unsolicited advice. Your parents are in prison. No one is coming to your rescue. I am currently paying for your hospital care, your medical treatment. I suggest you adopt a more respectful tone. It might make your remaining days slightly more bearable. Leo's eyes flared, a spark of familiar rage flickering within their depths. Gi, 6, you, sha, me. Give, you, shameless. The fragmented words, fueled by impotent fury, were barely intelligible. I applauded, a slow, sarcastic clap of my hands. Excellent. Progress. This time, the meaning is almost coherent. However, I continued, my tone hardening, that sentiment should be directed inwards, not outwards. Shameless is precisely what you are. Do you truly believe you are still the same Feng Lei who could abuse and degrade me at will? Look at yourself. Incoherent speech, paralyzed limbs. You are a broken man. Leo's eyes burned with impotent fury. He seemed to gather his remaining strength, attempting to flex his fingers, to clench his fists. But his hands merely trembled, weak, spasmodic tremors. He couldn't even lift them from the bedsheets. A surge of cold, exhilarating triumph coursed through me. The suffocating shadow of fear that had haunted me for years seemed to finally, irrevocably, lift. You used to threaten to kill my entire family if I divorced you, to take me with you to the grave. Let's see what you can do now. From my bag, I produced the divorce papers, unfolding them with a deliberate flourish, presenting them before his unseeing eyes. You always claimed you beat me because you loved me too much. If you truly love me, then don't burden me any longer. Sign these divorce papers. The remainder of your insurance payout, every single penny, will be yours. It will more than cover your nursing care, your medical expenses. I paused, a calculated pause, feigning sudden realization. Oh, forgive my insensitivity. You can't physically sign, can you? Never mind. We can record a verbal agreement. I'll arrange for a notary to witness it. Equally legally binding. Leo's body began to tremble, a violent, convulsive shudder. But even trembling required energy, and his depleted reserves were rapidly failing. The tremor subsided, leaving him limp, exhausted. No. He gasped, forcing out 2 words, a whisper of refusal. I smiled, a cold, mirthless smile. You refuse? Very well. It's your choice. But your nutritional supplements, well, they might need to be adjusted. Don't worry, I added, my voice dripping with false reassurance, I'll ensure you receive just enough sustenance to keep you alive. Barely. Leo's eyes widened, a raw, primal terror replacing the impotent rage. Yo, you, evil. You are evil. Evil? I echoed, tilting my head, feigning thoughtful consideration. Perhaps. But who made me this way? When I treated you with kindness, with compassion, did you ever treat me as a human being? You treated me worse than an animal. I throw a bone to a dog, and it wags its tail in gratitude. I placed the divorce papers on the bedside table, rising to my feet. The divorce offer stands. Think it over. Let me know when you change your mind. If you change your mind. Goodbye, Leo. And do try to be well. Or not. Leaving the hospital, I didn't look back. Not long after, my mother called. Serafina, dear, she began, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, almost hesitant, when are you coming home for a visit? I paused, taken aback. It had been so long. This was the first time ever that my parents had asked me to come home since everything. When Leo had first fallen into the coma, my parents, mortified by the public scandal, had called, not with concern, but with condemnation. You couldn't have just endured it? You had to make such a public spectacle? What will people say about our family now? A man is the pillar of the household. Now he's bedridden, how will you ever survive? Disappointment, sharp and bitter, had choked me. Without him, I had retorted, my voice tight with suppressed anger, my life will finally begin. And hung up. Since then, a silent chasm had stretched between us. Until now. They had, I suspected, finally followed the news, absorbed the public discourse, perhaps even watched the viral video. And, gradually, their perspective had shifted. They had, belatedly, begun to understand. My mother continued, her voice softer still. Our relatives, our friends, they all know what you went through. They are sympathetic. Your father and I, well, we've realized we were wrong. A bad marriage, it's better to end it, quickly, decisively. A warmth, fragile yet palpable, bloomed within me. A flicker of hope, a tentative sense of reconciliation. Everything, it seemed, was, slowly, painstakingly, moving towards the light. Xiaojia called regularly, providing updates on Leo's condition. He can move his limbs now, a little. Still clumsy, but he can manage to drink water on his own. His speech is clearer. Still slow, but he can form complete sentences. He's become volatile. The other patients in the ward, 2 elderly ladies, they know about him. They tease him, constantly reminding him he's a domestic abuser. He can't stand it. He tries to lash out, but he's too weak to even sit up properly. Today, one of the ladies suggested he get a haircut, a new hairstyle, said covering his face would be a vast improvement. He threw a plastic fork at her. She retaliated. She gave him a good thump. I didn't intervene. He's become quieter. Barely speaks anymore. He's probably starting to understand what it feels like to be stripped of dignity, to be worthless. I think he's finally accepting his reality as a vegetable. I listened, silently, to Xiaojia's dispatches, offering little comment. The years of abuse, the constant fear, the suffocating oppression, they felt increasingly distant, fading into the receding shadows of the past. Then, one morning, Xiaojia called, her voice different, urgent. Ms. Shen, Leo wants to see you. If he still refuses to sign the divorce papers, I said, my voice flat, there's no point in a visit. Xiaojia relayed my message. A moment later, she returned to the phone. He says, he will agree to the divorce. But, he wants to speak to you, in person. I hesitated. Then, a cold curiosity, a morbid fascination, propelled me. Very well, I conceded. I'll go. Driving to the hospital, a prickling unease, a vague premonition, began to stir within me. But I couldn't quite pinpoint the source. At the hospital, Xiaojia met me at the entrance. Mr. Leo asked me to come down and guide you. He's been moved to a different room. He was worried you might not find it. A faint unease intensified, a subtle disharmony in the otherwise normal exchange. But I still couldn't articulate the nature of my apprehension. Then, as we approached the designated room, the horrifying tableau unfolded before my eyes. Leo, facing inwards, was perched precariously on the high windowsill, half his body already dangling outside. 14th floor. 14 stories above the unforgiving concrete. His bed, I noted with a chilling clarity, was positioned closest to the window. The privacy curtains, usually drawn around the bed, were pulled shut, concealing him from casual observation. The other patients in the ward, I realized, had likely heard some commotion, some muffled sounds, but hadn't yet grasped the gravity of the situation. By the time we arrived, they were just beginning to stir, to investigate. With a surge of adrenaline, I suppressed the rising panic, forcing myself to remain outwardly calm, to assess the situation with cold, calculating detachment. Is this why you wanted to see me, Leo? I asked, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. To use your own death as emotional blackmail, to coerce me into staying married to you? This wasn't unprecedented. This melodramatic self-destruction was a familiar tactic. He had always weaponized his own pain, his own self-inflicted suffering. Not just against me, but against himself. After each episode of violence, in a grotesque parody of remorse, he would punch walls, slap himself, even cut himself with razor blades, theatrically threatening suicide, all to manipulate me, to guilt me into staying, to reassert his control. Initially, I had been tormented by this toxic blend of rage, despair, and self-destruction, repeatedly succumbing to his emotional terrorism. But with each repetition, the effectiveness of his performance had waned, his theatrics becoming increasingly transparent, increasingly pathetic. Now, witnessing this final, desperate act, I felt nothing. No fear, no sympathy, no flicker of the old, debilitating guilt. Whatever he did, whatever he threatened, it could no longer sway my resolve, could no longer derail my escape. Divorce was inevitable. Liberation was within reach. But then, Leo spoke. And his words, chillingly unexpected, shattered my assumptions. No, he rasped, his voice strained, halting, each word requiring immense effort. I agree to divorce. He could form complete sentences now, albeit slowly, painstakingly. You agree? Disbelief, sharp and disorienting, pierced through my carefully constructed composure. Yes. A barely perceptible nod, a flicker of movement in his pale, drawn face. The ward, too, suffocating. Window. Fresh air. He gestured weakly towards the open window, the abyss yawning beyond. His gaze, surprisingly clear, surprisingly lucid, met mine. Papers, where? I sign. It was too easy. Too seamless. Too unlike Leo. Was this some elaborate ruse? Had he somehow, impossibly, undergone a genuine transformation? Caution, ingrained by years of manipulation, tightened its grip. Come down from there, Leo, I said, my voice measured, carefully neutral. We can talk, properly, inside. I gestured to Xiaojia to approach, to assist him, to gently guide him back from the precipice. But Leo shook his head, his gaze fixed on me, unwavering. You carry me down? His voice was barely audible, a breathy whisper. A cold dread, visceral and instinctive, began to coil in my stomach. What? Carry me down, he repeated, his eyes pleading, almost childlike. You carry me, sign divorce. Doubt, suspicion, a chilling premonition, all coalesced into a sudden, sickening certainty. This wasn't surrender. This wasn't repentance. This was a trap. A final, desperate, suicidal act of vengeance. But the divorce papers, liberation, freedom, so close, tantalizingly close. Hesitation warred with a reckless, almost self-destructive impulse to just end it. Now. Once and for all. With a surge of grim resolve, I made my decision. I would play his game. One last time. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself against the rising tide of dread, I approached the window. Reaching out, my hands outstretched, I prepared to help him, to carry him down from the ledge. And then, it happened. With a sudden, terrifying surge of adrenaline, Leo lunged. His hand, surprisingly strong, surprisingly fast, shot out, grabbing my wrist in a vice-like grip. His other arm snaked around my waist, his weakened body suddenly infused with a desperate, maniacal strength. He twisted, pulling me towards him, his weight shifting, his center of gravity tilting precariously outwards, towards the open window, towards the dizzying drop. If I can't have you, he gasped, his voice a triumphant snarl, no one will. It all happened in a horrifying, slow-motion blur. My body was being dragged towards the window, his weight pulling me off balance, towards the terrifying void. His grip was surprisingly powerful, threatening to overwhelm me. But years of living in constant, hypervigilant fear had honed my reflexes, sharpened my instincts. I had anticipated treachery. I had braced for betrayal. Even as my body tilted outwards, towards the abyss, my hands shot out instinctively, grasping the window frame, my fingers clawing at the rough stone. Anchoring myself, desperately fighting for purchase. My feet, scrabbling for purchase, found a precarious foothold on the narrow ledge of the wall. Xiaojia, reacting instantly to the unfolding horror, lunged forward, grabbing my arm, pulling me backwards, inwards, towards the relative safety of the room. Leo, weakened by months of immobility, his body ravaged by disease, was rapidly losing strength. His initial surge of adrenaline faded, replaced by labored gasps, by a desperate, futile struggle. His grip, though initially strong, began to loosen, his fingers slipping, sliding on my wrist. With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched myself free from his grasp. And Leo, his momentum carrying him forward, his body overbalanced, his grip failing, pitched forward, headlong, into empty air. Behind me, Xiaojia screamed, a high-pitched, terrified shriek. On the windowsill, Leo's silhouette vanished. A long, agonizing silence stretched, broken only by my ragged breathing, by Xiaojia's choked sobs. Then, from the distant ground below, a sickening, muffled thud echoed upwards. Thump. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I closed my eyes, the image of Leo's twisted, hate-filled face seared into my memory. In the final moments of his life, he had still, desperately, attempted to drag me down with him. But he had failed. Now, finally, definitively, we were separated. In life and in death. We were finally, irrevocably, free of each other. The cycle of violence, the cycle of fear, the cycle of pain, was finally, irrevocably, broken. Epilogue, New Spring. The ashes of Liu Feng, neatly contained in a somber urn, were packaged and discreetly delivered to the prison gates. His parents, consumed by perpetual anxiety over their only son, could now have him, in a sense, reunited with them, within the cold, unforgiving walls of their prison home. With Leo's death, our forced, tormented marriage was automatically dissolved. I was, at last, legally, emotionally, spiritually, free. Spring arrived, tentative at first, then burgeoning, vibrant. The biting winter winds softened into gentle breezes, carrying the scent of blossoming trees, the promise of renewal. Sunlight, warm and life-affirming, bathed the world in golden light. Life, in all its fragile, tenacious beauty, was reasserting itself. My senior class, the graduating class, plunged into the final, intense sprint towards the college entrance exams. My days were filled with demanding schedules, relentless preparation, and the quiet satisfaction of guiding young minds towards their future. Busy, purposeful, engaged, I felt a sense of groundedness, a sense of normalcy that had been absent for far too long. The shadow that had loomed over me, suffocating, oppressive, had finally, completely, receded. Mission seems different lately, Ethan remarked one afternoon after class, a gentle smile playing on his lips. She smiles more now. A lot more. The scar on his cheek, where Leo had bitten him, was fading, almost imperceptible now, though the memory, I knew, would linger. I had offered him a substantial sum, a gesture of gratitude, of atonement for inadvertently involving him in my carefully orchestrated escape. But Ethan had refused, accepting only the basic medical expenses, nothing more. Any decent person, he had said, his voice gruff, sincere, would have done the same. Stepping in when a man abuses a woman, it's not heroism, Ms. Shin. It's just basic decency. But, Ethan continued, his expression turning thoughtful, a hint of hesitancy in his voice, there's something, a question, that's been nagging at me. If you don't mind me asking. Of course, I said, meeting his gaze, a flicker of unease stirring within me. Ethan hesitated, then plunged in. That day, at the rehearsal, the day of the gala, you sent me that photo of the stage, with the flower pot in the center. You said you wanted to use it as a reference point for our positioning. But I was standing right next to you. Why send a WeChat message to me, when you could have just told me directly? A wave of shame, of regret, washed over me. This was the part of my plan that still pricked at my conscience, the collateral damage of my desperate escape. I lowered my gaze, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Ethan. I needed Leo to know my location. To ensure he would come. I used your kindness, your willingness to help. I'm truly sorry. But Ethan simply smiled, a warm, forgiving smile. Next time you're planning a theatrical performance of that nature, he said, a hint of wry humor in his voice, just give me a heads up. I used to be a boxer, remember? A little backup wouldn't be a problem. Relief, profound and cleansing, washed over me. I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh, the first truly free laugh I had uttered in years. There won't be a next time, Ethan. That chapter is closed. Now, it's time for a new beginning. I had traversed the darkest depths of hell, had stared into the abyss, had emerged, scarred but unbroken, into the radiant light of liberation. From now on, I was no longer an appendage, no longer defined by another's shadow. My destiny was my own. The reins of my life were firmly in my grasp. The journey ahead stretched, vast and uncharted, full of unknown possibilities, uncharted territories, and the exhilarating promise of self-discovery. And I, Serafina Shen, free at last, was ready to embark, to explore, to embrace the boundless expanse of a life reclaimed, a life finally, gloriously, my own. Ready to journey towards a horizon as high, as wide, as limitless as the boundless sky itself.